passenger rail going, especially in the 3C and D corridor. This is Ohio's certainly most densely populated. It is the most heavily traveled when you consider there are 3 interstate highways, portions of 3 interstate highways involved in the corridor as well. So not to mention everything else that goes with it, major universities, major medical centers, major sports teams, things like that, not the least of which is, of course, the Buckeyes here in Columbus. But this is an important connection, and not just for those connections to just go see a ball game, but to connect with jobs, education, and healthcare and what have you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I will turn it back over to Josh. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stu. Next, I want to introduce Linda Pitt, the mayor of Crestline, Ohio. Linda?
Thanks, Josh. I am Linda Horning Pitt, mayor of Crestline, Ohio, which is situated in between Cleveland and Columbus, halfway. And a little bit about me, I grew up here in Crestline. I was born and raised, and we're a railroad town. We were formed by the railroad in 1851. My grandparents worked the railroad. My dad worked the railroad. I mean, 95% of the citizens worked on the railroad at one time. And we always had the railroad, and then transportation, and then Amtrak came along and we had Amtrak, and then when Amtrak left, that's where we are today. I was here, I graduated, I graduated from University of Notre Dame, and then I left for 30 years. And that's going to be a positive because I have been able to travel the world, travel the country to ride rail all over. So it's great to come back to bring that expertise back to the area. And so I moved back in 2016, ran for mayor, and took office 2020, and we are the Crestline comeback. I saw the opportunity, and I'm excited. So we're there to get us back on track. Thanks,
awesome.
Josh.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Next, we have Derrick James, who's the senior manager of government relations at Amtrak. And Derrick, you can tell us where you're joining us from too.
All right. Thank you very much, Josh. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. And as always, great to see you, Mayor. Great to see you, Mr. Nicholson, as well. I'm joining you from Chicago. Chicago is the base of operations for Amtrak's Central Division. Chicago is the hub of our service in the Midwest, but that hub requires vibrant population centers radiating around. And so our goal is to have the Midwest to be better connected to passenger rail. At Amtrak, we're very excited at the reception that we have received from communities and citizens and elected officials throughout Ohio at our plan to dramatically expand passenger rail service in the state. We think that the metropolitan areas and the rural communities of Ohio pay taxes, they travel, they contribute to the economy, and they deserve to have a viable rail transportation system like exists in other parts of the country. And we think that we have at our doorstep a great opportunity to expand that service so we can provide a level of mobility and a level of access to really make life worth living and life easy for our friends in the Buckeye State. We have served, as was mentioned, we have served the nation since 1971. We're in our 50th year since we were created by an act of Congress to run the nation's passenger train system. But we have been hobbled for decades by a lack of consistent vision, both at the federal and at some state levels, on the role that passenger rail can play. And fortunately, that is changing. The infrastructure law that passed last fall provides an unprecedented level of funding, and we want to take advantage of that to do better by the American people and especially by the citizens of Ohio.
Thanks so much, Derrick. We're excited to have you here, as always. And lastly, we have Pete Metz, who's the director of the Connected Region at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber.
Hi, thanks for having me, and good to be with some folks I know and some I don't. See some familiar faces in the participant list. I'm Pete Metz. I'm the director of the Connected Region at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber. We are an organization that represents a couple thousand businesses across the three-state Cincinnati region. And my role in particular is to lead a coalition of business and civic leaders who are focused on building a more connected region, connecting folks to jobs, education, healthcare, and everything else that our region has to offer. I think Stu referenced all the arts and culture and athletic amenities that so many of our cities in Ohio have. To do that, we've really focused on investing in the future of public transportation, providing people with transportation choices that fit their lifestyles, improving and maintaining infrastructure, thinking about transportation in the future and future-oriented transportation projects, as well as trying to align all of our multi-state, multi-jurisdictional regional leaders towards this shared vision. And so in Cincinnati, we're lucky to have some Amtrak service, and so our interest in this conversation is twofold. We're very excited about the opportunity of what 3CD can bring, but also expanded Cardinal service. The first thing I did 6 years ago when I came to work at the chamber was show up to a conference that I was told I was planning the Cardinal conference here in our offices, and that's I think the first time Derrick and I met. And Stu, I think you were probably there too. But we've had a long-standing. Yes, yeah, it's been a while. So eager to have the conversation, eager to talk more with folks and talk about sort of the business opportunity for our region that passenger rail brings.
Well, with that, let's get right into the questions. Let's start with, I think this one is probably for Derrick, but others can chime in as well. We've seen some proposals for various Amtrak corridors as part of the Connect Us plan, if that's correct. What do we need to do in Ohio in order to advance these corridors? And maybe you can give us a little bit of info on some of those proposed corridors, which include the 3C+D, but there are others as well.
Thanks for the question, Josh, and thanks for whoever asked that. The infrastructure bill, the challenge for passenger rail in the United States is there hasn't been a consistent federal funding stream. Highways just don't land on the ground, and airports just don't grow because organically there is actually a partnership between the locals, the federal government, and the industry to actually provide those services. But that has not existed for passenger rail. But now that has changed. Over the past 15 years, we've gradually seen more money come into passenger rail so that we can make expansions of service and improve the quality of the level of service that we provide. Where we have made improvements is because we have had a state partner to do so. Like many federal programs, federal grant dollars flow through to the states. So the states have to be a willing partner to accept and receive those funds and to match it with their own to actually put projects on the ground to make them happen. And so those dollars are now on the table to an extent that they've never been before. And so we're seeking a partnership with the state of Ohio to receive those federal funds and to invest in the system so that we can add new service on new routes, and of course add more service on existing routes as well. So to the extent that we've got a public audience here, let your state elected officials know from the governor's office on down to the state capitol that you think this is a worthwhile investment for Ohio and that Ohio should be looking at partnering with Amtrak and the feds to bring more train service.
And Derrick, what does that initial interest from the state, what do we need to initially move this forward?
Well, the infrastructure law as laid out indicates that the federal government, starting 6 months from enactment, and that will be this May, will start to reach out to state governments and local governments around the country and say, there is now a federal program that can fund billions of dollars in capital investments for passenger rail expansion. Would you like to participate? So we need expressions of interest from local governments and the states. We don't exactly know what the Fed's inquiry or what their basically call for projects is going to look like. We'll learn more about that in May. We need organizations like yours, like Transit Advocates in the state, to watch for that. It'll be big news when that call happens, and we need Ohioans to step up, and especially the state and local governments.
Thanks so much, Derrick. That's super helpful because I know most of us here, if we're in this call, we probably want this to happen. So next I'm going to go to, and I think this is open to everyone. I know Stu may definitely have some comments about this, but can you give us some examples of similar corridors and how those have been implemented successfully around the country? And maybe if there's any economic impact around that, you might cover that too, Derrick. But Stu, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, there are there's lots of examples to point to, and not that far from Ohio's borders. You can go up to Michigan, or as everybody down here refers to it as that state up north. But Michigan has invested heavily in passenger rail, really going back more than 10 years, or so. They've got excellent service, 110-mile-an-hour service on at least a good portion of the corridor between Detroit and Chicago. They've experienced economic development growth at the various station stops, which Derrick can probably speak to as well. But matter of fact, last summer I spent most of 2 weeks up in Maine, and rode their Downeaster service between Brunswick, Maine and Portland, but that service also goes all the way to Boston. It is a very well-used service. Pre-pandemic, something like 30% or more of their ridership were daily pass holders, which means they were using it to commute back and forth between southern Maine and New Hampshire and into the Boston area, and even to some degree in a reverse commute. So those are both good examples. If you look at the states of Virginia, I mean, especially in recent years, Virginia has been very aggressive. North Carolina has been very aggressive and progressive about passenger rail investment. The states of New York, Pennsylvania is getting there. They just announced that they are extending the Philadelphia Harrisburg service out as far as Pittsburgh, and perhaps up to Cleveland at some point. We've seen a lot of states. Illinois is another good one. Wisconsin, Minnesota, are all at various stages of passenger rail development. Ohio, sadly, not so much in recent years, but again, I think what Amtrak is planning for Ohio is a validation that the 3C and D corridor and the other Amtrak host cities in Ohio are deserving of more and better service. And certainly, as I said, in the 3C and D corridor, it is a heavily traveled, densely populated corridor. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that we will gain a solid and steadily growing ridership base for this corridor once the trains get running.
Thanks so much, Stu. That was great. Mayor Pitt, one thing I want to ask you in particular is how would this benefit Crestline? I know, as you said, it's a railroad-centric community and it's a rural community. So what would this mean for your community?
And that's a great question. Interestingly enough, because we are rural, we are centrally located and we have about 300,000 population surrounding a 35-mile radius from Crestline, and probably more, but those people will have an opportunity to come to Crestline to board the train. And so of course my citizens will be able to board the train too, but we're looking at economic development. I mean, we heard that Amtrak was coming in thanks to Derrick last May, and businesses started already coming into Crestline. And so we're having an economic boom, but it's only going to get better with Amtrak coming in. So that opens the door to more jobs in our area. And a lot of people are now working from home and maybe having to go into the office once or twice a week, and they can grab the train and whether, go north or south, and they're also able to do that. So still live in a nice rural community, low crime, less traffic, and you're able to, grab the train and then hit major shopping, major sports, and colleges too. So that's the other thing. We have a lot of kids that go to college, and the parents can pop them on the train and know that they're safely going to reach their destination. And I've lived in big cities and the traffic's horrendous. And I love living in Crestline because there's very little traffic. And I think more and more people, we're seeing an exodus, if you will, of people coming out of the main towns. I mean, we still have some there, but really coming out to the more of the rural areas. So I think that's going to be good. As I mentioned, we are losing the malls in our area. So, people want to shop and they'll gladly board the train, spend a night down in Cincinnati. I'm looking for that, Pete. I'll come down and visit you. Okay. And then I guess another thing too, sorry, Josh, is that we have we have a large retirement community, and I know that that our senior citizens would gladly get on the train to go to visit their loved ones, you know, because of, again, they can't handle the traffic in either Columbus or Cleveland. So this is a great opportunity to really get those people mobile. And if you go on you think about it more, there's people who cannot drive, don't have a car, you know, maybe they're physically handicapped. What a great way to open up their, you know, their horizons, their opportunities to travel around the country as well.
I know, as a Columbus resident who has to travel to Cleveland, you know, several times a year for work, there's nothing worse than being on 71 for me. So I'm obviously in support of this just for that reason alone. I'm going to throw this next one to Pete. You know, Pete, you're with an organization that you said represents what, 13,000 businesses in the Cincinnati region. Do you have any thoughts about the business case for this, and if you've heard of any support within the business community, or maybe put it a different way, what do we need to do in order to get support from the business community for this?
Yeah, Josh, it's a great question, and I think there's a couple of different business cases here that matter that I've heard from my members who are around our table, because we've had Derrick in to present to some of our groups, and the CEOs around the table are intrigued and interested in the opportunity that, not just from a tourism perspective, but also from an economic development, a lot of things the mayor talked about. And I know that the mayor, all the things the mayor just described are very similar to what our friends in the city of Oxford, just north of Cincinnati, are thinking about. But let's talk about a couple of those business cases. The first is obviously there's the growing connection between Cincinnati and Dayton. And while, you know, we may not be one MSA regionally, we are beginning to think of ourselves as the Cincinnati-Dayton region. And so having this true Amtrak connection only strengthens our ability to move folks between what is a growing two growing cities together. And I think that's really critical as we think about what type of commerce is happening between our two cities. The second is the universities that we have in our region, and their ability to both attract students to them, but also understanding where their alumni are. And you know, we have strong local universities with regional alumni bases who will come back and who we believe will use this service to come back to Cincinnati, whether it's for a hockey game at Miami or whether it's a football game at Nippert. You know, the last one I would mention is sort of that full-on tourism approach, whether it's coming down for a Reds game or an FC Cincinnati game or an AFC champion Bengals game. You know, being able to be a Reds fan from out of town or a Chicago fan looking to spend a weekend in Cincinnati. There's a real economic draw here to make it easier to get to Cincinnati. And I would just add that we have maybe the most beautiful train station in the state. Don't mean to offend anyone else with their train stations, but Union Terminal is gorgeous. And to be able to activate that with even more people, having that be the front part of the city is a really exciting opportunity.
Thanks so much, Pete. Yeah, I wish I could say in Columbus that we have one of the most beautiful train stations, but all we have left from it is one arch. I think, so funding is coming up in a lot of questions, and I know that's something that has been on my mind too. And maybe this is for Derrick or Stu, but could you give us a little idea on not what the upfront funding commitment would be, because we know that is coming from the federal government if we were able to get these funds, but could you give any sense of what the ongoing financial commitment would be, or maybe what other similar services, what the financial commitment is from the state perspective?
Sure. I mean, maybe I can give you guys a couple of examples. And what I would like to stress, though, and to remind folks is that, you know, oftentimes those who are opposed to such projects look at the ongoing operating costs, but this is really a value proposition of what is it that we're investing, and is what we're investing providing us a return that is greater than what we're investing. We make these decisions on highway projects all the time. I don't remember Interstate 70 or Interstate 71 seeing their profit statement. But we know that those assets are valuable for the mobility of the region and of the state and of the nation. So let's take, for example, Stu mentioned some of the states that we have partnerships with, and I think that's important to clarify. That the feds have devolved responsibility for funding of passenger rail service to the states for short distance routes. We have 17 state partners, among them some of those that Stu mentioned. North Carolina and Virginia are aggressively growing their rail. Michigan, we've got a vibrant partnership where we're increasing speeds. Illinois has been a long-term partner. Wisconsin. Minnesota is a new partner. Minnesota, the legislature decided to invest and match with federal dollars to start new train service between the Twin Cities and Chicago. They felt that was important to connect those cities that are about 400 miles apart from each other, and will agree to the operating support over and above the fares, what they cover. As an example, the state of Michigan, we have 3 rail routes in the state of Michigan connecting Chicago with all of the major cities in the state, basically, and that's a $25 million annual commitment. The routes during pre-pandemic times see 1 million passengers a year. We connect 20 cities in that state. And I welcome you to visit the areas around those stations and see how those station neighborhoods are so important to those communities in terms of driving ridership to their hotels, to their restaurants. To the business community, it's important because of safe business travel for their workers. They can get work done, they can have meetings, they can have all weather transportation. So again, just to kind of give you an idea, the state of Wisconsin, we have a partnership. We run 14 trains a day between Chicago and Milwaukee. Very critical part of the business community there. Many businesses in this region have facilities in both Milwaukee and Chicago. So folks are constantly moving back and forth. SC Johnson and Miller Coors, I know they're government affairs folks because they're keen on what's happening with Amtrak. The state of Wisconsin, their contract is about $6 million a year. That route carries almost 1 million people a year. Most of the money that the state contributes is though to capital upgrades and improvements we're making on the route. Prior to the pandemic, we were on track to not even need any operating subsidy for that route. The fares were almost close to covering the operating costs of the train, and we hope to get back to that. So what we really want to do as we broaden the network is as we grow the network and add more service, it feeds into itself and each route supports each other route, and it helps to bring the operating subsidy per person down to the point that it doesn't, again, it's looked at as being a valuable investment that more than pays for itself.
Thanks so much, Derrick. And, I don't know enough about that region, but I have to venture to guess that, for instance, Cleveland and Columbus are maybe even more connected, given that we're in the same state. Go ahead, Stu, you had something to add?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to add something to what Derrick had to say. And that is what he's really driving at here is the fact that it makes it more of a true system, for operations. And this is something that really, I think, has its roots in what we hear from a lot of our members, as well as people who either use Amtrak or want to use Amtrak. And they talk about, well, I got to get up in the middle of the night to catch a train in Cleveland. This is what is going to happen if we can get the Amtrak Connects Us plan in place as completely as possible over the next several years. What this means is that people in Cincinnati, Columbus, Crestline, Dayton, Springfield, Toledo, Cleveland can look forward to actually boarding a train in the daytime. The old joke used to be that in order to get on Amtrak in the state of Ohio in the past, you had to be a vampire because you had to get up in the dark. It was pretty much 0 dark 30. This will change that. That is probably one of the most important changes, is that it's aimed at making passenger rail service in Ohio and through Ohio far more convenient, more timely, more cost effective, you name it, for people who want to ride, for whatever the reasons.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stu. Next question. So I'm going to try to answer as many questions from attendees as well. This is an interesting one from Anonymous, so I'm not sure who, but the proposed, at least in the past, maybe this is from, there was a previous proposal for 3 CD service. Maybe Amtrak has this in their Connect Us plan as well, but what would the schedule for that type of service look like if like trains per day or to get people hyped up?
Yeah, our initial proposal to get the service started is 3 trains each way a day, a morning, afternoon, and evening departure. That's just our initial proposal. The Amtrak Connects Us vision is just that. It's a vision to get folks excited so that we could start the real nitty gritty down and dirty planning. That doesn't necessarily have to be what the scenario is, but we think that's what makes sense to get us started so that folks can sort of leave from any point in the corridor or get to some other point, conduct a measure of business for the day and be home the same day. That's kind of what we're looking at. And that's the model that we've seen works elsewhere. And then as ridership builds, you can add on from that.
Awesome, thanks for that.
I'm sorry, and
And-
one more thing, Josh.
Go,
And just
please.
to be mindful, we talk a lot about 3C and D. We've actually proposed a sort of a broad network of service in Ohio with hubs at Cleveland and at Columbus, with service radiating out in multiple directions. There are lots of folks always, opponents will tell us that, well, America is not like Europe, we're more spread out. Well, yes and no. In the Great Lakes region and up against the Atlantic, we've got lots of major cities that are near each other. So we think that we can support high quality multi-frequency passenger rail service in the Great Lakes region.
That's great. And okay, maybe one last quick question along the same kind of funding lines. Is there a required capital funding match for this, or is all that coming from the federal government?
Just like other modes, there is a state funding match. The states that participate need to have some skin in the game. So the feds aren't going to foot all of it. So of course, now what's different is that there's a lot more federal funding that's available. We suspect that this will be about an 80-20 match, similar to other programs, 80% from the feds, 20% from the states.
Thanks again for that one. Let's see, going back through, I'll maybe open this up for anyone that wants to chime in here, but one of the very first question was basically somebody envisioning how important it would be for them to be connected to the other communities across the state. Pete, you touched on that quite a bit in creating that regional kind of connection between Cincinnati and Dayton. And I suspect the same would be true for, Dayton to Columbus and all these other ones. Do you see, how do you see that impacting individuals? This could go to anyone. What would it mean to have those connections for folks?
I can give that a try, Josh, and I'm sure I'll only give a couple of the use cases. But let's talk about Joe accountant who's got a base of clients and he's in Cincinnati and he's got an office in Columbus and a couple of clients in Columbus right now. He's getting in his car and driving his car an hour and a half, getting stuck in traffic, not able to be productive along the way. The ability to hop on a train for any sort of business professional who does work in any of these states is meaningful. I have to imagine, that the same connections you described, Josh, between Columbus and Dayton is one of real interest because there's already folks who are making that commute to work at places like Wright Pat and elsewhere. I have friends and I have colleagues who come to as far north as Dayton to come to jobs in downtown Cincinnati. All of those types of folks will have a new option that may be viable for them and it may not be, but it's a new choice. And I think that's really valuable. I really do think as we think about the individual, whether it's because I've got a family and I want to take my kids to COSI, or if you've got a family and you want to bring your kids down to the Children's Museum in Cincinnati, there's also this additional use case for the non-business traveler that I think is really interesting. And that's just, you could talk about students and you could talk about, a whole bunch of other folks as well, but there's just a couple examples.
Yeah, I strike myself as not a huge sports fan in a lot of arenas, but I know I would love to be able to take my dad down on the train to go see the Reds because it's all he loves. Sit there and listen to the Reds.
And if I can insert too, and I hope I'm not talking out of tales out of school or anything like that, but But our overall host, Angie Schmidt, has chatted with me in the past about, wanting to be able to connect, with her parents and grandparents. They live, one set lives in Columbus, the other set lives in Toledo, just to come and visit and meet their grandchildren. It may be a small case, but it points to the variety of reasons that people ride. I worked for the state of Ohio for 7.5 years. I did a lot of traveling on behalf of the state of Ohio, and every single bit of it, every mile, every minute was behind the wheel of a car. I would have done anything to have had that opportunity. I would go so far as I hope we're in a situation someday where a future state administration can basically tell their employees that if you're traveling between the major cities in Ohio, that your first choice has to be on the train, so that we can maybe save a little bit of taxpayer money on the use of state motor vehicles, or at least reduce the mileage to some extent. So there are many reasons, and a lot of good stories connected with that. I think that's one thing that I really want to stress. We have a call to action on our website, allaboardohio.org, that people can find almost at the top of the page there. And we're asking people to contact their state legislators, the governor, and even legislators at the federal level. And don't just say, I want to be able to ride the train. Tell your story. Tell why you want to be able to have this service. Why is it important to you? I can't stress that enough. Perhaps it's just the recovering journalist in me, but telling a story and illustrating why something is important to me is absolutely critical in this case. It's a question we get from legislators and other decision makers. Well, why should people ride the train? Aren't people married to their cars? And my usual response is, well, if it was a marriage, it was a shotgun marriage. So, people just haven't had a choice over the years. This is about creating a whole other choice for people to travel for whatever their reasons. But the most important thing you can put across to any decision maker right now is tell them why. Tell your story.
Stuart, that's
on that.
Please, because this was going to be my next question. Like, I would love to hear from all the panelists about different ways that we can work to make this happen, because I think that's the question we're getting from everyone. How do we turn this from our pipe dreams into a real reality? So I'll let you go, Pete.
Yeah, I think there are two things when you get down to sort of the tactics of this, and one is to understand sort of where decisions are made in the state of Ohio and who are the representatives who make those decisions. And that's why I think stories like the mayor's are so interesting, and stories about what's happening, not just in I'm sitting in downtown Cincinnati and there's someone sitting in downtown Cleveland. Those are not the only stories that need to be told, but it's what's in between those places and what that opportunity is. It's the outer ring suburban communities who, Derrick, I know you've had conversations with legislators who are interested in how that impacts their communities. I think that is as important, if not more important, than why it's good for the economy of Cincinnati or Columbus or Cleveland when you're talking to legislators. I also think that, tactically speaking, what we want to avoid here is having passenger rail have a redux of the 2010 passenger rail as a central campaign issue in a state gubernatorial election. I don't think that helps us move this thing forward, because we know that we're going to need Democrats and Republicans to be for this to help make it happen. So I just think that as we're thinking about who are the messengers we're sending out to talk to legislators, and how are we doing it in a way that sort of grabs as many folks as possible and doesn't make this 2010 all over again, the better off we are.
Hey, Josh, one other thing, like being in North Central Ohio, one thing we have going on right now is we are regionalizing 4 counties. I mean, we have economic development directors from Wyandotte, Crawford, Richland, and Ashland coming together because we have the US 30 corridor. And so we're now developing that area to be, prospective place for growth for businesses as well. And so that I know that will be a huge asset having Amtrak there as well, so that they can bring the people up to the area. People can live here, go to work, or go to work, come to, live somewhere else, come to Crestline, because we're right in the center of all 4 counties right there.
Mayor, I think, well, you're an elected official, so I will, keep going this, keep throwing this question to you as well. I'm sure this isn't the only issue you deal with, but what have you been hearing from your, legislative officials, and what kind of things do you think that we can do to help make this a reality?
Well, that's, I don't want to say, because don't want to put him on the spot, but I have reached out to both Senator Reineke and State Rep Reardon McLean, and so there were, and then also part of Crestline is in Richland County, where we have Senator Roman Chuck and we have State Rep Marilyn John as well. And what's really great is that we have a really good working relationship with both legislatures from both counties, so that's always a plus. And so what I'm really hearing, I know Senator Reineke is on the Rail Commission board, correct, Derrick, in Ohio Rail Commission. So he's on that. So he's really been, he has been really, in my mind, really for me. I believe he's helped pushing, our area. And then I'm going to tell you, Representative Reardon has some concerns, and Derrick already alluded to that. It has to do with what happens after the 5-year subsidy from the government. That's his concern, is how are we going to sustain it? And I really believe that we have to really press upon him that, hey, this is not like another rail that failed. This is Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. This is huge population that I believe that it will sustain itself in the future. I have no doubt. It is sad because from what I'm hearing, with Ohio and its population, we're like the only state has how populated it is that doesn't have a rail. I'm like, wake up. We need to get on board. Yeah, thanks to, we need to get on board with it. We need to, be a player. And that's, and that's exactly what we're doing in Crestline.
Yeah,
we're a player in our region.
What it sounds like to me is that not only do we need to be working with our state legislatures, those of us that live in, urban, dense counties, but we need to maybe be looking for our partners throughout the state and throughout, our smaller communities to also help impress upon their legislative leaders that it's important. It's not just for the cities, the large cities, it's for all Ohioans.
Josh, I want to just clarify something for the viewers here, and I'll try and keep it brief and not be too wonky, although I think
we like wonk.
Participating will probably have a little bit of clarity, will understand. I spoke briefly about what we need the state to do is to raise its hand in mid-May when the federal government says who wants to participate in this rail program that is now funded at $66 billion for 5 years. We need Ohio to step up to the plate and say, yes, we are interested in looking at it. What will then happen at that point is that the federal government will receive those requests from states around the country and then start to do further analysis on the various corridors that looks at refining what the capital costs are, what the ridership will be, what the revenue could be, and what operating loss would be if there would be any. And then at the end of a year, meaning in May of 2023, then the federal government has to issue a report to Congress saying, these are the priority corridors that we want to advance with the money you've given us over the next 5 years to put these in place. And it's at that point that the states, where the corridors exist, can say yay or nay that they want to start to participate financially. So right now, the feds are not going to be asking for any money from the states, just an expression of interest in saying, we've got some really dense travel corridors here, 3C and D, Cincinnati, Toledo, Detroit, Cincinnati, Toledo, Chicago, et cetera, or Cincinnati to Chicago, that we think makes sense to look at to look at in a little bit more detail to see if passenger rail makes sense. And then with that additional information, then the state can decide to proceed. One last point, if the corridor is chosen as a target corridor by the feds, not only does the capital dollars come to actually stand up the corridor, but there is a 6-year federal program to defer the operating loss for the startup of the service. Because when service starts, you're not going to have full ridership. But in theory, over 6 years, if the corridor makes sense and it's developed correctly, the ridership will grow and then the operating loss will decline, so that in the 7th year, if there still is some operating loss that needs to be covered, it'll be small, and it'll be so small and the benefits will have been so evident that the state will think, so this is a no-brainer. Sure, it costs us this much, but look what this does for our state instead. So that's kind of how the program will unfold.
Well,
Derrick, if I hear you, go ahead, Stu.
No, go ahead, Pete.
I was gonna say, if I hear you, what the first ask of our state leaders is to raise their hand and say, we want to learn more because we think this is interesting and there's opportunity here, right?
Yes.
So, and I think that's an important distinction as we think about what are our incremental steps to success here. You know, we're not asking for a appropriation in the next budget. We're not asking for, you know, this specific amount of money from this specific line item. It's really, we have an opportunity. We think it's worth pursuing, and we're asking you to explore it alongside the federal government, and then there'll be a conversation about, you know, the finances and the all of that. Is that a fair way of describing it, Derrick?
Absolutely.
So my question is, all right, so they have to raise their hand. Well, what does that look like? I mean, do they have to pass a resolution? Do they have to, you know, what do they have to sign a petition? I mean, what is it that they have to do to say, hey, we're interested?
We don't know yet. We'll know
Oh,
in
okay.
mid-May when the feds release their guidance on this.
I personally hope it's someone has to physically raise their hand.
I sign up. Question, you know, I'm not exactly sure who this will go to, but maybe Stu, maybe Derrick, maybe someone else. You know, we are talking a lot about 3C plus D rail. And of course, I care about that because I'm in Columbus. But I'm aware that there are other communities in the state that maybe already have some Amtrak service. And maybe it's not that great right now, timing wise. So what are there any plans in place to help improve existing corridors? And, you know, what is the importance of those corridors? I know one person asked specifically about Cleveland and Chicago, and another about Cincinnati to Washington, DC. These are part of the national Amtrak network. So are there other, you know, is part of this effort potentially to improve those routes as well?
I guess that's probably best for me. I don't want to dominate, but the answer is yes. I welcome your participants to go to AmtrakConnectsus.com. We have a drill down on Ohio. Almost every passenger route that exists in Ohio today with Amtrak is slated for improvements. What Amtrak did over the last 50 years is basically we were a placeholder. We held in place the infrastructure that was needed for a time when we could grow. So yeah, we have a train from Chicago to Cincinnati 3 times a week in the middle of the night, but that also means that we kept the train station in Cincinnati. Otherwise, it would be, who knows what would have happened to it. What would have happened to it is what happened to the train station in Columbus. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so by keeping the system intact, even if it was a subpar system, that gave us a foundation or a building block to build on. Cleveland is an example. In addition to 3C and D, we think all the other routes that radiate out of Cleveland, including up to Buffalo, Rochester, and New York, and Pittsburgh to Harrisburg and Philly, and Toledo to Chicago and Detroit, those routes have Amtrak service. They come in the middle of the night, but there are stations, and we want to add more trains during the daytime on those routes at frequent departures throughout the day.
And I think it's worth also noting that there are already communities and metropolitan planning organizations that are stepping up in a major way. NOACA, the Northeast Ohio area coordinating agency, NOACA has applied for a $3 million grant from the Federal Railroad Administration to undertake a critical needs study of the corridor between Cleveland, Toledo, and Chicago. What needs to be done to make it better and more capable of handling expanded service. There's a similar effort going on right now based out of Erie, Pennsylvania, but it would cover the corridor between Cleveland and Buffalo. I found out earlier this week that the city of Sandusky is applying for a federal grant to start looking at improvements that need to be made to the existing Sandusky Amtrak station, mainly the platforms, the trackage leading in and out of the station, and even perhaps whether to even build an entirely new station close to that site. So there's a lot of communities and metropolitan planning organizations. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Toledo's City Council is looking at the possibility of a Detroit-Toledo-Columbus connection. The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission here in Columbus has had on their planning books for at least the last 3 or 4 years a proposal to connect Chicago and Columbus and Pittsburgh via Fort Wayne and Lima. There's a lot of activity out there that recognizes that we have not only densely populated corridors that really need to be served as soon as possible, but future corridors on the table as well. So there is, if I would urge people, don't just hammer on your state legislator and the mayor. That's important, or the governor. That's important. But also start talking to your regional planning associations, your city governments in cities where Amtrak service exists. If there's an issue with the station, if there is something going on that would make train travel better, let them know about it. I think this is especially important on the local level. I can't stress enough. Again, when you talk to these people, tell your story. Even if it's a story about having to get up in the middle of the night and going to the train station and the train was late or whatever, talk about it. Tell them, hey, look, we need to have more and better. Ohio is long overdue this. I have lived in Columbus for 38 years now, and have lived in the second largest city in the United States without passenger rail service. It has been frustrating. It has been maddening to not have that option, but we've kept fighting. I've stayed involved in this, and a number of All Aboard Ohio members have. This is very important. Get engaged, not just with your state reps, but with your local representatives as well. I should point out we have been able to get unanimous resolutions of support from every single city council along the 3C corridor. We have the endorsement of mayors, such as Mayor Pitt. We have the Ohio Mayoral Alliance, which is an association of mayors of Ohio's 50 largest cities. They're looking at a resolution of support, and I've chatted with them, and they are definitely supportive of this. They recognize what we're all recognizing here. This is a great opportunity for Ohio to diversify its transportation portfolio, if you will, and a great way to start, not just moving people, but making Ohio a more attractive place to bring in more companies like Intel, and also for Ohio companies to have the incentive to expand the area where they can draw a workforce from.
Stu, I would just add, I think, and we've been clear about this when we've talked about it with other statewide partners, that for us in Cincinnati, the 3C and D is as important as the Cardinal service is to Chicago and east to DC. That we're fortunate to have maintained that service, but growing it is critical. And I would suggest, as you were talking about some of these secondary markets, Derrick, take notes on this. You should be extending down the line to Louisville. The Bourbon Trail has reached Cincinnati, and the opportunity to be connecting in between Lexington and Louisville for our region, especially as a 3-state region, is meaningful. And certainly it's not a line on the map today, but as we grow, we are a 3-state region, and that would matter.
As somebody who works in Frankfort, Kentucky, I would also support that. I think of so many places that I have worked in as a planner around the not just in Ohio, but kind of outside it, like Fort Wayne, Indiana, that I'm like, oh, this would be great. I would have saved a lot of rental cars One question, I think this might be a quick and easy answer, is it, does it make more sense to advocate to our federal legislators, so our senators and state or reps, or should we be focusing on our, Ohio House of Representatives and Ohio Senate and local officials in terms of advocacy for this? Anyone?
Well, I'm thinking the state, local,
Yeah.
because I mean, the feds already have, they got the money, they got the approval, and now we have to get the approval from Ohio. So let's go to the Ohio state legislation and get them on board for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few more minutes, and we have a few more questions, but if anybody has additional questions, please submit them either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to get those answered before we end. Let's see here. Pete, maybe this is kind of a question for you. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you collaborate a lot with other chambers of commerce or the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, but I think it's really important, again, to get the business community on board. How do we get the other chambers that, maybe haven't jumped out in support of this yet on board, whether it's the statewide chamber or others around the state?
That's a good question. I mean, we the regional chambers convene and talk to each other about regional issues across the state on topics from transportation and others. And so, that might be one venue for us as a chamber and other chambers to get engaged. But I also think, frankly, for us, we listen to our members more than anything else. Right. And so, when we've convened a group of, we have structured our work around transportation in a way that's a little bit different than other chambers. And I think that's led to some real impactful transportation changes in the Cincinnati region. But I think that is driven by our members. And so when, I had Derrick in to present to a group of our CEOs, and they're eager and interested, and folks are raising their hand and say, I want to learn more, I want to hear more, that was impactful. And so I think to the extent that, chamber to chamber is an important conversation, but who are the key business stakeholders in those chambers footprints, and what's their value proposition? That's more than anything else, before we take policy positions and get engaged on these things, we go to our members first.
Thanks, Pete. That's very helpful to know. I know from the advocacy community standpoint, I think we have to do all we can in our local regions to really get the business community on board, given the political alignment of our state legislature and the way that they kind of look at a lot of things.
Well, and just underscore one other thing here, because I think the questions that legislators are going to ask around the ongoing financial commitment and sort of all of the nuts and bolts, dollars and cents that I think everyone on this call and in the comments understands the value proposition of, are still questions that need to have firm and pinned down answers for folks to go beyond the let's raise our hand and find out more. It's like, yeah, let's invest. And I think that it is easy for those who are really supportive to say, of course, it's a no-brainer. Having pinned down answers and having that case buttoned up is really important to be able to grow from sort of here to there.
And I think this really speaks to the importance of something that Derrick said earlier. This is why Ohio needs to raise its hand, because we can get that process started where we determine what are the capital costs going to be, what are the potential ridership numbers going to be, what are the potential operating costs going to be. The truth is, right now, we don't know the answers of these questions until Ohio raises its hand and says, look, we want to participate in this. And I've been involved in this process before when I worked for the state. And there is ridership out there. There is definitely the ridership demand out there to support this. But we're going to have to answer those questions of state legislators as to all right, well, how much do you think the operating costs are going to be? What, at how will ridership affect, what that figure is, things like that. But right now we've got to figure out exactly what needs to be done in the corridor. I mean, that is an important study, because we just can't slap a train on the corridor and hope it's going to run efficiently. There's a lot of work that has to be done, which, by the way, is a big job creator when that work gets underway. That's a huge job creator for heavy construction companies, the same people that work on our highways. So that is a plus right there. But I think it's what we're talking about here makes it all the more critical for Ohio to step up, whether that's the governor and the General Assembly, and raise their hand and say, tell the FRA when the time comes, Ohio is interested. We want to go to work. We want to go to work with you, and get the answers, and then make an educated decision from that point, hopefully a good one.
Thanks, Stu. A few last, I think, short questions that might have easy answers is, do we know if the funding opportunity includes construction or renovation of train stations? So like in Columbus, for instance, we would have to build a new train station. And does the money from the federal government include funds for that? Maybe this is a Derrick question, or maybe we don't know yet.
All right, I guess I wasn't muted. Questions to be answered. I think what's important to reflect back upon is the federal program will be a match program.
Okay.
80% federal dollars, 20% non-federal dollars. So it really depends on how, if the state decides to advance, how it packages its application. Does it ask communities to pony up for the development of the rail station, and is that part of the match? So a lot yet to be determined.
Okay, great. Well, as we're wrapping,
that's an interesting question as well. Even in places like Cincinnati where we have that service is going to drastically expand. And so what does that mean for those places, and how do we support them in growing to meet that need?
Yeah, a good example actually near Cincinnati is what the city of Oxford is doing. They are currently planning a train station in Oxford, which of course is the home of Miami University of Ohio, to service, well, initially the Cardinal, but then eventually whatever expansion of service there is between Chicago, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. So that's a big step for a community to step up like this, essentially on spec, if you will. But they are deeply committed to doing that. I should point out that every community, with the exception of Cleveland and Cincinnati, on the 3C&D corridor will have to have, either build or redevelop a station. I mean, I've been to Crestline. I've seen what Mayor Pitt has along trackside. There's great opportunities there.
And I think if everybody can do a quick Google and see that Columbus has kind of released an initial design for a potential station here, and I'm very excited about that. And I see the Oxford folks in the chat, so we know you're excited too. Well, as we're wrapping,
hello to them. I was just in Oxford.
There you go. As we wrap up, I want to give everybody one last opportunity to, give us your parting thoughts, as well as maybe something a little fun about the first place, at least for us Ohioans anyway, the first trip you would take on the train. So let's start with Stu. Oh, you're muted, Stu.
My first trip, I hope, coincides with the beginning of baseball season that year, because I plan on going to Cleveland to watch my my longtime New York Yankees play the Guardians, or go to Cincinnati and see them play the Reds if that's on the schedule. But I'm a big baseball fan. I would love to make that trip by train.
Well, that might be a little sacrilegious for some Ohioans here, but I guess that's okay.
Yeah, but hey, I'm a lifelong Yankees fan. I grew up outside of New York City. I mean, I'm more than willing to bear the burden. So,
How about you, Mayor Pitt?
I believe I want to go shopping. I mean, I want to go shopping. I want to eat at fine dining. And so, whether it's Columbus, Cincinnati, in fact, I'd rather take the whole route, and then spend a few days here, get back on a few days there. So that's why I said to Pete, I'm coming down to visit Pete, and he's going to, introduce me to fine dining. Right, Pete?
Mayor Pitt, I've got it's restaurant week in Cincinnati this week, so come on down.
Oh, is it?
I like
Okay.
Pete's idea about the Bourbon Trail. I think that's awesome.
Oh, I do too. And then if you're going to Louisville, you might as well go to Nashville. That's where I moved from, because a lot of people are going down to Nashville for fun.
I love that. How about you, Pete?
Well, I wouldn't be a Chamber of Commerce employee if I wasn't actually pitching people coming here instead of me going there. And I know that this session is in part planned by Tri-State Trails, who do great work. And I think that the opportunity to come to Cincinnati and ride what will be the best urban trail network in the Midwest over the next couple of years is a great opportunity. And frankly, you can get on your bike, and as opposed to taking the train back to Cleveland, you can take your bike back. We are building something really special when it comes to bike and pedestrian trails here, and bringing your bike on the train and coming down. I know Derrick has done that before, and what Tri-State Trails and their team are doing is great. It's a huge asset to the region. So get on the train, come to Cincinnati, and bring your bike.
Yeah, I'm as an Ohioan, I'm kind of on the same level. I go to Cleveland a lot for work, so that would be great for me. But I think I would like to come down to Cincinnati a little bit more frequently, and that would be my first trip to have some great restaurants and over the Rhine. But I will leave the last word for our event to Derrick. To maybe you can also give your trip, but also just any other parting thoughts you have for us.
There's so much to do in Ohio, and like you said, Pete knows I did this and Stu does too. A year or so ago, one of my pandemic activities was to ride the Ohio to Erie Trail. So I took the Cardinal Amtrak down to Cincinnati, stayed in a hotel for a couple days, enjoyed Cincinnati. I've got to spend more time there. Was up and over the Rhine, stopping at bars and restaurants, and then biked all the way to Cleveland. I am a big roller coaster fan, so I want to see more service to Sandusky so I can get to Cedar Point. I want a car-free trip there, so then I can take a ferry over to Kelly's Island. I also want to come down to Cincinnati, and we need connecting service so I can get to Kings Island. Parting thoughts, we've been really heartened by the enthusiastic reception that we've received around the country for the Amtrak Connects Us plan. Those of us out in the field for government affairs have always known there's been this well of support for Amtrak and that people want us to succeed, and it looks like it's coming to fruition. Let your state legislators know that you think the Amtrak Connects Us plan makes sense for Ohio.
And I'll add this finally. Go to allaboardohio.org and sign on to our call to action. Let your voice be heard.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And Derrick, I mean, you've name dropped enough that it seems like you, at a minimum, have spent a lot of time here in Ohio. So we'll give that to you. But thank you all for attending. And you can tell we're very excited about the possibilities here. And we really want to see everyone go into their own local communities and help advocate for this service. Angie, I'll throw it to you.
Awesome. Great job, everyone. Great panel. I think it was so helpful to hear from Derrick, especially just because it's confusing with federal grants, and even people who are very engaged in this have been trying to figure out exactly what the next step is. So you guys can take off. We're going to have a little break now, and the next session is about innovative small towns in Ohio. We actually have someone from Oxford, and they came up in this panel on our next panel. And again, it's at 3, so take a break, check your email, and then meet us back here.
Thanks so much.